Well, it happened. I made it through Ironman Chattanooga 2024, a race that for me was 5 years in the making. I'm not right now going to go into all the reasons why this race was significant to me, but suffice to say, I am a native of Chattanooga, Tennessee. I grew up there, lived there for about 20 years of my life, and it's home. So to be able to come back and race again for the first time since 2019 really means a lot. And I can go into in a future video everything that went wrong for me last time I did in 2019, but for this video, I want to focus on what happened this year. So it has to be said, I feel that we are very fortunate to have the race. As you just saw, Hurricane Helene was moving through the region on race weekend, and a lot of places were really, really devastated by it. Augusta, Georgia, the 70.3 down there was canceled. There's a lot of places that were really, really badly impacted, and my heart goes out to anyone that was affected by the storm. Chattanooga was supposed to get the brunt of it, and we were really watching the weather for about the 72 hours leading up to the race. But at the last second, the storm just pivoted east and rotated right around the city. So ultimately, the race happened. We found out about 48 hours or so from the start the swim was not going to go ahead, which, as much as I might hate it because the swim is my strength, there's no part of a canceled swim that helps me whatsoever. But it was definitely going to be the correct decision. That water was moving on race day, and the water was continuing to rise throughout the weekend, so there was just, conditions wouldn't have been safe. But what this meant is for the pro field, we went off in 30-second increments, and we drew random numbers at the pro briefing, and basically went off in a random order for a time trial bike start. And I ended up drawing number 9, so I was the 9th starter. I went off at 8:04 a.m. I knew I had to bike hard. Frankly, the swim is my strength along with the bike, so I'm not going to be making up any positions on the run. I know that, and that's exactly what I did. I went out and I did my best to really assert myself. In particular, I really wanted to put the hammer down as much as I could on loop 1 because my suspicion was that coming onto loop 2, things would be extremely congested when we're beginning to overtake all the age group traffic. And for those that don't know, the course was changed this year. We actually went north this year on a highway section, which was another dynamic. And basically the way the course works is you're going mostly downhill on the way out and mostly uphill on the way back. And in general, very smooth tarmac, very gentle rollers, a very fast course in general. Like I said, I wanted to push lap 1 of the bike. In doing so, I definitely passed several guys that were in front of me right out of the gates, and I had 2 guys pass me pretty quickly on loop 1. It rained basically the entire time. And I ended up connecting with the train of guys for a little bit, but really I found that I was pushing the power on the way back kind of up the hill into town, and I really kind of without trying ended up breaking away. Lap 2, like I said, ended up being really congested. It was really hard to play race dynamics at all on that. I just kind of had to do my thing, and I think it was heads up riding. Everyone had to be constantly yelling on your left. Everyone was still trying to kind of sort themselves out. That's why I thought that it was going to be a madhouse on loop 2. All the age groupers were going up in bib number order, whereas before, with the swim, you kind of have most of the stronger athletes probably toward the front of the field, so there just wasn't that time to get sorted out yet. But I survived it. I pushed it as best I could. Really stuck to my numbers. I was pushing high 290 watts for the first 2 loops of the course. Kind of on loop 3, I toned it down a little bit, just keeping in mind that, the run is coming, the run is not my strength, and I really wanted to have a strong marathon for me. So again, I toned it down, probably about 260, 270 watts was my target for that 3rd loop. And At the very, very final turnaround, probably maybe a mile or two before that turn, is when I got caught by the big train with like Jackson Laundry, Cody Beals, Andy Dreitz, Elliot Bach yelled at me to jump on the back of the train, to which I accepted the invitation, and yeah, rode with those guys for probably about 20 minutes or so. They ended up pulling a little bit away from me at an aid station. I needed to get an extra water on board, and a little bit of a gap opened up, but they were still moving, and I definitely had to up my power plan by about 20 watts or so from the point that I decided to connect with those guys. So frankly, it was just so late in the bike, and I really didn't want to kill myself before that run, so I just decided to let the gap open and let them go and just kind of prime myself, let any nutrition digest, and just get my legs ready to hit solid pavement, which probably was the right call. But at the same time, in that moment, ever since the race, I've had increasing frustration about that experience, because holding that power was not unsustainable for me, and I just think that if I had been able, if I had started with those guys, they all started 15 minutes behind me and were able to work together and, get some drafting benefits off each other, riding at the legal distance. And I wasn't a part of that. Just the way that the race dynamics were, where I started in the time trial start, I didn't have that opportunity. And, I wish I'd had the chance to be a part of that, and I would have had a much better bike split. But it was what it was. Course was a little bit short. I had about 108 miles, but I'm not going to complain about a 404 bike split. At the end of the day, I think I had about 3,500 feet of elevation gain. Definitely fast, definitely not flat. But yeah, honestly, it was a great ride. I had a blast out there. I really actually liked the new course. I just wish that we had a little bit more traditional race dynamics and a swim, so that I could have maybe made contact with some of those guys. And it was just so weird, because they were all in front of me by time, but actually behind me in terms of position on the race, which is frustrating. But anyway, got to transition, and came off, and they told me I was the 10th fastest bike overall, and was really, really happy with that. That was definitely a step up for me, and legs were definitely a little bit heavy to come off the bike, but that's, I think, pretty normal. Got off onto the run, and I was running well. I was running about 6:55 per mile, which is good for me. I'm not going to be winning the race at that pace, but that's definitely a very good pace for me in an Ironman, and it felt sustainable. Now, the thing I have to mention at this point is that about, we'll call it a month prior to the race, it was a couple weeks after Lake Placid, I started having some hip pain. And I was managing it. It was just a little tightness. I wouldn't even call it pain really at first. It was just some tightness in my what I thought was my hip flexor. And I was managing it. I was rolling. It would go away after, a good night's sleep every time. Really, I didn't think anything of it. And then eventually, about 3 weeks out from the race, it got to a point where it was a little bit more persistent. It felt like a tightness in my hip flexor. And I just told my coach, hey, I think I should take a few days off running. And it got a little bit better, but slowly, and tried to run again that weekend. Definitely it didn't hurt, but I felt it, and definitely it hurt a little bit the next day. And so we just said, me and my coach, that okay, let's do some PT, go see what he says, and we might think about just not really running at this point before the race, because at that point it was about 2 weeks out until race day, and you're really not going to make any fitness gains in those last 2 weeks. So I worked with a PT, and basically we assessed that I had a little bit of weakness in my glute med, and so my legs weren't firing properly and absorbing the shock from the impact on my run. I don't run in like two parallel lines as far as my foot strike. My foot strike was a lot more center, so I'm kind of tightrope walking as I'm trying to run, which obviously is not great running mechanics and does put a lot of stress on the joints. So we surmised that we've known that I've had basically a labrum tear in both sides of my hips for a while now, and the suspicion was that I was having kind of a flare up and some joint inflammation associated with the running mechanics, and might even be associated with that labrum tear. But uh, managing it with some strengthening and with just a dedicated focus on those running mechanics to run in parallel lines as opposed to dead center, and just some general body work and rolling, mobility, scraping really seemed to go a long way to help and get me running pain-free. The point came about 8 or 9 days from the race where we just said no more running. It's not worth it, not worth the risk. Just get to the race healthy, do your thing. So I did that. I got to about mile 10 of the marathon, and this is about where you cross over the river and start the big hills. Well, as I was coming down Barton Avenue northbound, the start of the hilly section, yeah, I was definitely feeling that pain in my hip, and it was definitely pain at this point as I was going downhill. And then on every subsequent downhill, I would feel it a little bit more. And as I was coming down Barton from the other direction to go back across the river, I had this moment where I just felt like both of my hips and my quads just like almost give out underneath me. Like I felt like my legs just blew up, and I was still having that that achy pain and in my right hip. Really, it felt muscular at this point. It really did. I thought that, I knew at that point that it was going to be a battle. Like, I could tell that I was fatiguing. I thought potentially it was because I overbiked. About miles 13 through 17 or so, I was fighting. I was in a real fight to keep running. At mile 17, it just became an absolute losing battle. I was having, muscular pain in the front of my quads and this hip pain that just now wasn't going away. And it just got to the point where at an aid station, I had to walk. And once you start walking, it's really a war to keep from walking the rest of an Ironman. But, I have a rule of thumb, and once I get past mile 16, that is what I consider the point of no return. Barring medical emergency, there's no reason that I'm not getting to the finish line. So, the thought of quitting at that point never even occurred to me. I knew I could get through this. I just had to stay strong. I was trying to figure out what I needed. I tried all kinds of different combinations of nutrition at the aid stations. I had my own nutrition from special needs, and nothing could get me going. Nothing could make this muscular pain feel better. I was pretty diligent too. I would give myself a 30-second walk break, and I held myself to it. But every single time I would take that 30-second walk break and to get running again, it would get harder and harder to start, and the pain in my hip would get more and more intense. And just slowly over the course of the next couple miles, my pace drifted up from going low 7-minute mile to like 9:30, almost 10 minutes per mile, which is not a great feeling. As I was about to start the hilly section for the second time, a friend of mine that I know from Washington, D.C. area, she saw me and told me after the race, and told my coach, because we have the same coach, that I looked like an absolute zombie at that point. And really I was obviously 19 miles deep into an Ironman or so, and legs were not feeling it. Got to the hilly section, and the downhills really hurt. And as I was going over Barton, that same section I talked about before, Barton northbound, going over the hill and downwards, I was able to run up the hill, but coming down, I walked almost the entire downhill, and pretty much every downhill after that. My quads were both failing underneath me. My hips were hurting really bad, both of them actually at this point as I was going down. And there were a couple other pros that were catching me at that point. I knew I'd had like 20-25 minutes on, and they were yelling at me, "Come on, don't walk the downhills." And I'm just like, I can't. I have nothing. I'm literally gonna fall over if I try and run right now. Finished that hilly loop, got to the pedestrian bridge, and it was really a battle to keep myself running at that point, as it always is in an Ironman, because I was hurting. And eventually I just just through willpower was able to get myself to the finish line. And I mean, that's at the end of the day what it takes for an Ironman. But the story doesn't quite end there. So, it was, like I said, it was raining pretty much the entire day, and even on the run too. Not as bad on the run when I was out there, but I was cold, so I definitely knew I didn't want to stick around the race for very long. I really went to pick up my bike and get home and get warm. And really, what I found is that I needed my bike for support. Like I was using my bike essentially as a walker to get myself back to the car, which isn't wholly unexpected. It is an Ironman. People get carted off in wheelchairs all the time, and this is normal. But things didn't feel good. I definitely thought I had strained a hip flexor, and on the theory that I was having some joint inflammation and some tendonitis going on, definitely that would track that I've probably made it worse by running a marathon on it. Well, the next day, I still can barely walk, but the thing is, I literally can't move my thigh, basically. Like, I'm literally having to grab my arm, my hands on either side of my quad, pick it up, and move it onto the ground, and, move it around. I can barely walk, I can barely put weight on it, and, it's an Ironman, stuff happens. This goes on for a couple days, and the thing is, this weakness in my hip flexor never got better. And, at this point, it's 2 weeks after the race, and I'm still having this issue where it's, aching. I had actually already made an appointment to see a hip orthopedic, just to check on labrum tears and other things that were going on in my hips, just to make sure and just double check. Got an MRI and found out that, unfortunately, I have a femoral stress fracture. It's likely been there for quite some time, is what my doctor said. Almost guaranteed I did this Ironman on it. The question is, did I do Ironman Lake Placid on it as well? I did not finish that day. That's another story. I'll talk about it later. But that was a bombshell. Shows me pictures, and sure enough, there is a big old crack in my bone. So, yeah, I ran Ironman Chattanooga, and what I thought was my muscles shutting down and potentially some tendonitis was literally my bone breaking underneath me, which makes me feel a little bit validated. I should mention as well, so I ended up, like I said, I was 4:04 on the bike, ended up with a 3:26 marathon. I was gunning for under 3:10, so I was a little bit disappointed with that. But now knowing that I was running with a fracture in my femur, I feel a little bit validated, because that pain that I was feeling was not made up. It wasn't muscular, it wasn't nutritional, it wasn't even overbiking. It was real. It was real, and it was bone. So, like I said, validating, but at the same time disappointing, because obviously now we have to let that heal. So Doc wants me to basically not do any running or biking, and actually no kicking in the pool either, for another 6 weeks, and then we're going to reevaluate, which is a big bummer. I had planned to go down to Ironman Cozumel and potentially 70.3 Indian Wells, but that one was always a little bit of a question mark. Neither of those will be happening now. This ends my season. I'd hoped to have another good one. I'd hoped to get under 3:10 in the marathon, but such is Ironman. Anything can happen. Anything is possible. So right now the mission is for me to get healthy and get running and biking again. And this is a little bit more of an extended off season than I'd planned, but I had planned to take 2 or 3 weeks totally off this year. I'm confident that I'm going to bounce back from this and hopefully jump right back into training, hopefully towards the end of November. And, I'm excited for next season. I don't think I really quite fulfilled what I wanted to at the full Ironman this year. I only finished 2, and frankly wasn't really happy with either of them, but was really happy with how all the 70.3s that I did went. So that's my season, and
even though I'm having to end my season early, I'm happy and incredibly grateful that I got to cap it off with an Ironman in Chattanooga, Tennessee, my hometown race where I first got into swimming, competed in my very first triathlons, and with a ton of support out there from friends and family.
I cannot say I recommend doing an Ironman with a stress fracture. If you're having hip pain or pain anywhere, get it checked out, get an MRI before you do the race. But I will say the pro schedule just got released, and Ironman Chattanooga is back on the calendar next year. So I can say I will be back. I definitely have another score to settle with Ironman Chattanooga. So I'm looking forward to that and picking up training and getting ready for next season. So this has been a really long-winded recap, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.